But yeah, if you remember last week, we have an American base that was vacating the northeastern part of Syria, and they started building up troops at the, give me one moment, Hurir Air Base, right on Iran's border, northwestern border. And I said, so look, strategically, Iran is bombarding Kuwait. They're hitting Kuwait hard, right where we would be putting troops because Iraq's border, like there's like a very, they might as well not even have a border. They have it there. Similar to how like our country was formed. Philadelphia is a great example. Pennsylvania is pretty much landlocked besides Philadelphia. And I'm sure there was an agreement saying, hey, look, let us put a port here, so we have access to the ocean. We don't need all this land. We just want to have a port. So too is Iraq, basically landlocked except for a very small outlet. I wonder if I actually can get the name for it. It's not pulling it up. It's not. It's not really even important. But just so you know, like that's how thin the border is between Kuwait and Iran. So we staged a lot of military infrastructure there. Two airports. One's dual use. The other one's completely American, for the American military. And let's not kid ourselves, the other one probably is too. And then just north of that, we have the other air base. And I said, if we were ever to launch an invasion, a ground invasion into Iran, those would be the two launching points. And I also said, which is terrifying, I said if that other air base gets hit, that would signal to me that Iran is signaling they believe that there's going to be a ground invasion. One of the strikes over the weekend, and I'll go through the day by day because I actually got a summary this time around rather than trying to do it off of memory, because that was just a, just a miserable failure. Um, yeah, so they actually hit that base over the course of the week, which is pretty gut wrenching. It's pretty gut wrenching, and I will start with the other thing that kind of supports what I'm saying is we're hearing peace. Okay, if you understand the demographics of Iran and their military, we hit a hornet's nest, and you just got to run away. That's the only way to calm this down is to leave, and we're not leaving at all. We're basically standing there behind a shield, poking the nest with a stick, and every once in a while the bee gets through the shield. And yeah, I mean here, I'll just read the headlines so that I can stop because I'll just keep rambling in circles if I don't stay on task. Um, his saying Wall Street Journal, Trump's Iran deal still has to get past the Revolutionary Guard, and that's true. And if you've been privy to the subject and been following it moderately deeply, you'll know that Iran's military makeup is not what the US's is in most respects. It's more so imagine our military. No, we don't have any centralized military. Our military is solely the National Guard troops around the country. Um, that's what we're dealing with Iran. And like I was saying, imagine trying to negotiate with all 50 states. I mean, you can't do it today. We can't get California and Florida to be even remotely in agreement on anything other than using the dollar, yeah, as a currency. There's really nothing they agree on. And so, too, I mean, I would imagine, and this is speculation, so I could be wrong, and I probably shouldn't even make the comment if I don't know if I'm right, but they're a hyper religious, at least from my observations, they're a hyper religious society. So they do have that pulling them together. Um, so you may be able to get some agreement in that respect, but we also basically killed their pope. Um, we've disrespected the land in a lot of ways. We've snuck attacked them. They will never trust us on face value, and that's just a recipe for disaster. So, anyways, yeah, them striking that base to the north is really just not good because that signals that they don't believe that this is ending. And then if you also saw my post at the very beginning of the week, I kind of did a shout out on my previous video, but we further degraded their radar sites. We struck Qasem Island. We also struck Bandar Abbas, their naval headquarters, and then also, and see, this is why you got to do your research and make your maps and go through it. They also have a huge radio transmission facility there. And I'm going to actually go through it, and I actually marked this down as infrastructure, and people need to understand, what we're talking about here. Markets and the military is really just an extension of market influence of a country. And I know that might be kind of making it a little bit more sterile than it really is. If you know me, I'm pretty religious myself. I absolutely believe certain things about this world, and that maybe it's not as material as we believe. And maybe that's the whole point. And again, this show isn't here for me to talk about my religious beliefs or anything like that, but I'm more than happy to speak about it with anybody who would like. But if you're going to understand how markets work, you need to understand how military conflicts work and how soft power works. Again, the US dollar is the soft power we have over the world. We can influence a country's growth or destruction in some ways based off of their ability to use our dollar for energy. So it's really important you understand that conflicts have, and that's one of the things, I mean, we're seeing it today. If you don't think that conflicts are important to the market and how it affects your portfolio, um, I don't want to be confrontational, but you're just not paying attention, because your portfolios today, unless you're in a very diversified, and I mean diversified in the true sense, where you're in uncorrelated assets to the market, you're going to be the majority of people are being affected by this. And even if you aren't in uncorrelated market assets, you're still going to be affected by energy costs, probably. Um, I believe the only thing that's really insulated by this is probably the real estate space in some ways. Not a call to buy, sell, or hold that, but the domestic real estate space may be, but how long until and that's initially how long until other certain factors play a role into um, the supplier demand being affected due to people's purchasing power. So you do need to understand these things. And when you're understanding conflict, you need to understand the logistics. These things can't operate in a vacuum. The logistics of a conflict matter, because that's how you're able to continue being a country, defending your borders, defending your natural resources, defending what makes you profitable as a country, defending your country's influence upon the world. So just because they have a standing army and they might have standard defenses, one of the things that they do more than anybody else is they build missiles. They have missile factories. They're extremely resourceful in building their missiles. Something that the United States doesn't do, because we're more so building the infrastructure to impose safe travel over the seas around the world, and we have the dollar as our missile. That's how we control things. It's starting to get dark in here. I was trying to use the natural light. Let me, give me one moment. Turn that on. There we go. Now I seem like a real professional. So, anyways, yeah. So you need to understand that when we attacking the infrastructure is very important to the conversation. Um, and like I went over yesterday, we're in a glass house scenario. Right now, Iran really holds all the cards, because we can't stop them from firing missiles, and all of the oil infrastructure that we protect and is essentially ours in a lot of ways is completely vulnerable to them, and it got to be one of their bargaining chips that nobody's talking about. So, anyways, so to go back into it, I'm going to read a little bit about this radio transmission hub that they have. So, Bandar Abbas is Iran, and I'm undoing the top button. We're going to get a little bit relaxed. It is Friday. Bandar Abbas is Iran's primary commercial port and naval gateway to the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, the economic and military center of Iran's southern coast. Beyond its naval role, the port handles the majority of Iran's non-oil imports, including food, medicine, and industrial goods. A radio transmission facility here was struck in late March, killing at least one person, targeting communications infrastructure that coordinates both with military operations and civilian maritime traffic. Bashar Abbas's port disruption compounds the Strait of Hormuz closure to create near total economic isolation of Iran from seaborne trade. So not only did they strike that, they struck their naval headquarters, and then they also struck Keshem Island specifically, which is another ground control station. And again, I can only imagine, and this was a further degradation and multiple strikes, from what I understand, a little bit more significant than what had happened previously. The previous strikes were significant enough, but this was a little bit harder. And again, it just, if you're going to expend, now that maybe I'm reading too much into it. They might be easy targets because we have the naval capabilities right there to do it. But again, when it comes to conflict, and I wasn't in the military. I wasn't an officer. I was just, technically a foot soldier, right? But I have enough of an understanding to know, we had things, we had small time strategy, and the Marine Corps is decentralized in a very similar way to where even an individual squad or even an individual fire team can operate on their own in a lot of ways, especially if the leadership's doing their job and passing down the information down through the ranks. If you can do that and then you have adequate leadership below you, you can almost speak with somebody one time if you give them good orders, and they can go out and do exactly what you need them to do, and they'll know what to do if they can't get it done. And that's what decentralization is hey, what do I do? A big thing about giving orders is, what do I do if it doesn't work? It's almost, what you do if it doesn't work is almost as important if it does work. And I went through an advanced course while I was in, and writing orders. When you're writing an order, one of the things that you're doing is you're literally writing all the things that you could possibly think are going to happen, every little thing, and you will prepare for every little thing. You will prepare yourself, the people under you. You'll prepare at every single level. Every single part of any type of mission is broken down to very, very, like, from where the time you wake up, not even that, the time it took to get ready the day before or the week before, or depending on how big it is, every little part is thought through. And so I can only imagine when they're giving the orders to strike these areas, just based, and maybe this is why they cut that video off, because maybe I do know a little bit too much, but if they would have a plan, and just like any other military would, mind you. So again, I'm not saying anything anybody doesn't know. You can literally look up a 5-paragraph order on the internet and you can figure out how to do it. So again, what I'm saying is public knowledge. It's just little known knowledge, but you can find the information out there. I'm not spilling any secrets. But yeah, one of the things they had to have done is they had to have looked and said, we have submarine assets in the area. We can only imagine that they have radar sites in the area, especially right there, because they can monitor the strait both above and below. Let's hammer this with every opportunity that we have, and let's try and pass a sub through. Absolutely. So, I don't want to read too much into it, but I definitely kind of am trying to give people a good diversified perspective. Diversify your perspective on this situation. So yeah. So that's a good initial place to get started. Now, what's interesting, apparently, well, we'll go through what initially started it. So Israel So we'll just go back. So there was a ceasefire. They said Israel needs to stop targeting southern Lebanon. They did not stop. They continued. Uh, where did they hit? I believe they hit Beirut. I've got it right here. Yes, they hit Beirut. In response, Iran responded and sent some rockets to Tel Aviv. Israel responded by striking Iran in a few different sites, and we're going to go through each one of them. But they have a very most of them have a common goal. They struck a site in northern Iran, which was basically another underground missile complex. They struck a second one, and I should say northwestern Iran, very close to the base that was the American base that was actually hit. They hit another underground missile facility in, I guess you could call it the Midwestern Iran. And then finally, they struck. Well, not finally. They struck a huge petrochemical zone. So it's a refinement of sorts. So they basically just hit a huge part of Iran's oil production, similar to how Iran struck Qatar's natural gas production or natural gas refinement, really. Um, and then they also struck anti-air sites in the middle of Iran. Specifically, well, I shouldn't say specifically; it's unclear, but Israel fired on Isfahan, which, if you know Isfahan, if you know the area, there's a huge air base complex there. It seems that they've already struck them, or we struck them in the past and took out some of their air capabilities. Maybe they put them back online, and the IDF just hit them again. On top of that, there's a nuclear and missile complex also in there. Yeah, it's one of the places. I mean, here I don't really have the best notes on if it was degraded or not, but it's been repeatedly struck. So, and I do know that it's built into the mountain, I believe, or maybe I guess I don't know if I'm saying I believe, but I do know Isfahan is well defended, just like Fort O. Um, and then it seems that there was joint strikes from U.S. and Israel on Tehran. Now, the specific damage, I have the note here, the specific damage to the infrastructure is unknown, but the targets were the IRGC facilities located just outside the capital, a manufacturing complex, barracks, and a local guard base. So Israel's theme really was in Israel's interest. They were trying to knock out their missile capabilities, which, for obvious reasons, um, they really, I mean, they hit a SAM site for their to knock out some of their air capabilities, but it was only one spot. So, and I should have noted, but I didn't. It's very underreported, but some of the strikes that happened in Kuwait were from Iranian aircraft. It wasn't from a rocket or anything. It was from the Iranian aircraft. So, the Iranians actually were able to get within Kuwait's airspace, basically American controlled airspace, and drop a bomb from a very old aircraft. So, nobody's really reporting on that. I'll throw it in there for you, just, so you know that I'm doing my due diligence, my research. Um, but yeah, I mean, the significance of hitting a SAM site, I don't know. If there's a specific channel, I wasn't in the Air Force. I do remember doing some like anti-air uh, training, like calling in. You see an air site, you can call it in. And generally, it's called a SEAD mission, and um, you're using other assets to knock out anti-air sites so that your air assets, whatever air assets you have, can come in. Again, I wasn't an officer. I didn't do a whole lot of time, so I don't know some of the maybe high level stuff, but I do know just some general knowledge that kind of gives me a little bit better insight in some of these military activities. But yeah, so I mean, could that have happened, and could we have had some type of stealth mission happen? Who knows? And probably, because I bet I'm not even reading through the actual breakdown, so I probably should do that. I'm just literally going through the different sites that were hit by Israel, but Israel did start this. I'm obviously trying to focus on the American side of things because I think that there's a better story there. But yeah, I mean, maybe that was what they did in conjunction. I don't know. I actually, damn, see, this is what I'm talking about. You know, you get ready to start something and you start talking and you realize all the stuff you should have looked up before. But I would surmise that maybe the attacks on Tehran happened after they struck that SAM site, and um, that would allow U.S. air assets to pass through and strike Tehran directly. Who knows? I mean, looking at the map here, there's a lot of different military sites, a lot of different Iranian bases, significant bases between um, between where any aircraft would be launching from. So that air site, I don't think it's that significant, but I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm not in the back rooms to find out. So let's get into what happened. Um, it all spurred with Israel and Lebanon. The talks collapsed. The U.S. enters with new strikes on June 9th and 10th against multiple targets. And Trump accused Iran of downing a U.S. helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz. And this is actually very important to talk about. So that's what the U.S. is claiming. However, Iran reported that they had nothing to do with that. So that's significant because Iran's been pretty forthcoming in claiming that they have or haven't committed strikes against the U.S. So when we have the U.S. saying one thing and Iran saying another, you know, maybe it's a form of statecraft. Who knows? You know, at this point, who knows? So, um, and there were a lot of explosions reported. So we don't have actual hard. A lot of these we don't have actual uh, hard explanations, obviously, because the reporters that are there are possibly unsympathetic to America, or the American reports that we have are watered down because they're the American media. Um, but it's saying, you know, there were explosions reported near Tehran, as well as near the Strait, Banar Abbas, Keshem Island, Karg Island. I didn't actually put that there was a strike on Karg Island. I had a hard time finding anything specifically about what happened at Karg. There was the U.S. did strike relatively within Iran's borders, so we've already gone over what happened at the Strait. Should be noted too. Last Friday, I believe it was, we actually while I was doing the show, um, we knocked out some of their drones. So important to note. But then there was also um, an airstrike in the vicinity of Shiraz. And the only thing, again, they're not explicitly saying that certain places are struck, but in that area, that immediate area, is the Shiraz Air Base. So it's southern Iran's main tactical air base, positioned to defend the Zagros Mountain corridor, and provide air cover for Persian Gulf operations. So this is probably where that jet flew out to hit Kuwait, I'd assume, because that's its mission structure. And you know, maybe that is kind of painting a clearer picture that we probably had some type of air operation up in there. If we hit that site, and then because if you look on the map, you can see that air station is relatively close to the Gulf. The only thing between, if you're looking at drawing a straight line between that site and Tehran, and I'm talking a literal straight line, it doesn't have to be that way. They could have came in from anywhere, but there's a refinery that's on the Gulf. That's the only really major Iranian infrastructure, and then I believe there's like there's a naval air base right on the port Bushehr. Um, but anyway, so you have the refinery. I'm talking straight line to Tehran. Actually, I'm probably going to have this up so you'll be able to see it. But for those who are listening, then we struck the air base that's directly north of that, and then directly north of that we have Isfahan, which is where the IDF claimed to take out the anti-air sites. And then beyond that is the Natanz nuclear facility. I got to change that to infrastructure. And then you have Fordo. I got to change those to infrastructure. So yeah, I guess I take that back. Maybe that was a coordinated air assault in some ways, because the only air assets beyond Bushir, the only air assets that they would have to stop our incoming air were hit. So there's something there. I really need to change those two. I'll do that after this, but yeah, maybe there's something a little bit more legitimate there. So, anyways, Trump called off the remaining threats to, or the remaining strikes to Iran, setting a breakthrough in talks to end the war. Now, again, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just seeing a lot of signals that, even going through this just now, seeing a lot of signals that we and they, and this is just part of it, a very slow, a very, very slow and methodical approach to what could be some very serious military action. Now, if I'm going to be counter arguing my own point, I would say we did pull out one of the aircraft carriers. That's pretty significant. Drawing the third aircraft carrier of the out of the area was very significant. Uh, so there's that, and I don't believe the troop movement. Like, if I'm being honest, from what I see, I don't believe the troop movement out of Syria to that Iraqi base in the north is specifically for this conflict. I think they just are done with Syria. We have essentially our guy in there, and I'm not saying that I agree with the guy. I know what he's done, and um, I'm absolutely not a fan of him, but I'm just saying, as far as the United States is concerned, we have somebody in there who's going to respond to what we ask them to do. Um, and maybe that was a part of their deal. I don't know, but I don't think that base leaving really is. It just might be a win-win again. One of those very obvious moves. We don't need to be in Syria. We can build up the base, because it's not a lot of troops that moved. And again, the numbers are out. The numbers are out there. So what I'm saying isn't it's not a state secret what I'm saying. So it's not like we're reinforcing the base specifically to reinforce it. It just seems like typical troop movement from the downgrading of a base that we don't feel like putting the money in towards. Probably with a primary or secondary objective of reinforcing the base on Iran's border, sure. But I don't know. I like there's good counterpoints. Obviously, it's a good thing that we're speaking about peace regularly. That's probably the best news. Um, but at the same time, it's just these targets that are being hit are very, very strategic. Oh, and I forgot one more strike, excuse me. And then there was a final strike on Bahrain, specifically on our Fifth Fleet headquarters, which the Fifth Fleet headquarters covers the entire area, the Arabian Sea, Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. So, that's kind of your Iran update. Um, I just, from what I understand, and I want to be wrong, and I think I could be wrong. I'm open, very open to being wrong. This is going to be something that is going to be extremely hard to get out of, because the Iranian people, like the Iranian strategy. So, and if you look into other major conflicts, like the preceding of World War I, I believe. No, World War II. The preceding of World War II. So Iran is so similar to Germany in World War II and World War I. It's just so similar to Germany in general. I just drew another conclusion, but in a lot of ways, this is similar. They they have Iraq and Afghanistan and if you're listening to this and you don't have the map, Iraq and Afghanistan sandwich Iran in the middle. Iraq's to Iran's left, and Afghanistan is to Iran's right on a map, or I guess east and west. Iraq is to Iran's west, and Afghanistan is to Iran's east. And it's sandwiched right in there. Germany had a lot going on following World War One, and they were sitting there saying they had the dual. It's something. The quote was like, "If one strikes, we strike both," and that was because the reason they had the Blitzkrieg and they developed such fast warfare was because the German generals were sitting there saying, "Look, we can't get bogged down in a stalemate. We can't draw these lines again because that'll kill us. A war of attrition cannot happen again." That was terrible, and they lived through World War One. A lot of them, that I mean, not all of them lived, but like the ones that did live had that experience, and they said we can't do that. So when they were drawing up the German war plans, they were no fans of Russia because Russia had some cultural differences from them that they posed would be existential, and then France, for very obvious reasons, um, there was the Rhineland that the Germans wanted back desperately because they saw it as their land. France didn't think so. So there was that contention there. So they knew that the Russians and the French were not their ally, and they had also, um, everybody understands. Oh, great! Of course, I know all this stuff, but I forget the Treaty of Versailles. Geez, I almost blanked that out, but everybody kind of understands that the Germans were taken advantage of in the Treaty of Versailles. So, anyways, yeah, they had. I'd have to go back and see why they partnered up with the Russians, but ultimately, we all know that Hitler did turn on the Russians partway through the war, and I would surmise that that was one of the reasons. Was the war plan was always to punch both. Um, it was more so in the beginning. It was punch both at the very beginning, and what it was, and it did play out exactly that way. If I'm really thinking about it, I'm kind of talking on something that I haven't looked at in a while. But they were like, we punch both as fast as possible, and they went through Poland, went through France, gained their foothold, and then turned on Russia, which was the plan. That was always the plan. Because they just couldn't trust either one of them. They couldn't trust France or Russia. So their battle plan was always to hit both. And so the long story short is Iran has been developing this battle plan for a long time, probably decades, because they know the United States since like the 50s has been looking to the early oil strategy. It's one of the reasons bin Laden was so upset with America early on into um, the the following World War II. We built a lot of relations in the area, started using Middle Eastern oil, putting in our own oil infrastructure. And yeah, it's one of those things where we had to have known for the longest time, especially when we started modernizing militaries and seeing that Iran was having modern military capabilities, putting in these different sites, these missile sites within the their mountains, that we were building up this infrastructure in a glass house. So, um, yeah, they've had nothing but time to think about what would happen if this day were ever to come, and vice versa. So have we. So, and I wouldn't say I didn't follow this really closely until it happened, but looking back on it, of course, Iran has complete control over the strait. Absolutely. If you like literally, if you just look at a map and you look at their infrastructure and look at their geological foothold that they have, I mean, it is really America is God's country through and through with our geological attributes and our advantages. But when you just look at Iran, you can see geologically, it's just a great position to be. It has a massive mountain range that they've dug into, and it has this little inlet that's straight that basically really truly blocks traffic from going in. The traffic has to divert and directly approach Iran and then turn its back to Iran and leave. Um, So it's just such a great buffer. And Iran really has such a choke point. It's just a natural pincer movement that anybody who passes through the strait can be struck at both sides. So truly, just a predicament to try and get around that. An ultra defensible position with an ultra advantageous choke point for the world's economy. And they hold a lot of cards. And then on top of that, they're also like a keystone country because through Iran, all the other stands, India, China, Kazakhstan, parts of Russia, Iran is great real estate to pass goods through to Africa and to Europe. So if you don't play nice with Iran, you're going to have to take an extended route, which we'll talk about Russia's extended route here shortly. But just really, really a problem for us. And so to cap it all off, because I'm gonna have to take a sec because I need to get a better camera. This thing only has so much life. I have 10% battery in it, so I'm gonna have to charge it to kind of finish everything off to go over Russia. Um, but yeah, they've had nothing but time to drop their war plans. And what the war plans are essentially is have a bunch of different factions, military factions, run the country, and I just don't see how, um, with their culture, with their feelings towards the United States, also with our track record of sneak attacking them multiple times, the sites that we've struck, the sites that they've struck, I just don't I don't see I don't see how we move forward from this unscathed. Or not even unscathed. I don't see how we move forward from this and truly walk.